welcome to NAPOD, where we provide NA speaker meetings and workshops in a podcast. We are an ad-free podcast, and if you enjoy listening, please help us to be self-supporting by visiting napod.xyz, look for the donate link, and drop $1 or $2 in the virtual basket. If you're also in AA or have friends that are, please tell them about our other podcast, Sobercast. Sobercast features AA speakers and workshops in the same format as NAPOD. We upload a new speaker every day, and it's easy to subscribe by searching for Sobercast, that's 2 words, on any podcast player app, or go to Sobercast.com. Enjoy the podcast, and thanks for listening.
Thanks and hope with this. Like about 20 minutes off now, so I'll hand it over to Harry.
Thanks, Tom. My name's Harry, I'm an addict.
Hi, Harry.
Nice to be here. It was a privilege and a pleasure to come to Bury St Edmunds. I usually start off when I do a show here by saying that I had the privilege of being at the very first NA meeting in Bury St Edmunds. It must have been about 13, 14 years ago, and there was, I think, 3 or 4 of us at that particular meeting. And look at it now, and I think there's meetings every day here, not 2 meetings a day sometimes, so it's just great to see. It's also really nice to be here tonight because I'm celebrating an anniversary tonight. I'm celebrating my 28 years clean. Positive message I bring you is the first 25 years are the hardest. Plain sailing after that. I always like to talk a little bit about my using. I'm not one of these people who sit there and say, you all know what your using is like, so I'm not going to talk about it. I do that for 2 reasons. One, because there might well be newcomers here. I don't recognise all the faces here, so there might well be newcomers here. And you're probably looking around a lot of very sort of like well-looking people who are sitting there saying we're addicts. I'm thinking, well, you don't look like any of the addicts I ever used to use with, so I need to give you some identification. And the other thing is, it's been a long time. Hey, good man. It's been a long time for me as well. It has been a long time since I last used a drug, and I like to remind myself about why I am sitting here on a Friday night sharing with you guys, and not sort of like at home thinking that I know best and that somehow I've got something to do with this, So I like to give myself a bit of identification. I'm not going to go through the whole lot. I'm not going to spend sort of half an hour, 20 minutes sort of talking about the using. I'm not going to talk, but I will say that I used for 14 years, and for the first kind of 11, 12 years, the kind of drugs worked. When I say they worked, I mean I had a good time. They were, I didn't have a kind of big spiritual kind of like thing where God put his finger down and said, Harry, drugs are bad, you must stop using them. I stopped using them because after 11 years they stopped working for me. And for me, the end wasn't gradual, it was almost like overnight. It was almost like one day the drugs were working for me and the next day they weren't. Having a good time, being taken out of it, and I spent the next 3 years kind of spiralling downwards very, very fast. Trying to control what was going on, because I didn't understand what was going on with me. I always thought I was a pretty good bloke. When drugs started going wrong for me, I thought I was a good bloke having a bit of a bad run. And in the end, I just thought I was a worthless gutter junkie that deserved everything that came my way, because obviously this was about me having no strength of character, me having no willpower, So, I tried to control my drug use. Like I said, the more I tried to control it, the worse I got. And, I didn't know. I'd never heard of recovery. I'd never heard of the 12 steps. I'd never heard of NA. I'd vaguely heard of AA, but I didn't have a clue what this was about. And my rock bottom was characterized by a complete and utter lack of hope. I was without hope. I was hopeless. The health was going, relationships had broken up. I was almost unemployable. I had all these other things that you would think that I would have been, any one of those things would have stopped a normal person from using. Never stopped me from using. The one thing that really kind of like made me sit up and take notice was there was absolutely no hope. And I didn't need to come to an NA meeting to realise that we ended up in one of 3 places: jails, institutions, or dead. I know we read that out at the very beginning, you know, we end up jails, institutions or dead, but I didn't need to come to a meeting to know that's where I was going to end up. It seemed to me people who use drugs like I use drugs kind of ended up in one of those three places. And I thought that's where I was going to end up, you know. I'd never met anybody who got clean. If you'd said to me at the time, what do you think making a success of your life would be? You know, I would say, well, just let me find a chemist that will sell me three bottles of codeine Linctus a day. You know, if I could find a chemist that would sell me that, then I would have thought that's what my recovery would have been. You know, I was out in Australia at the time. It was, I tried to get onto a methadone program and I couldn't get onto a methadone program. I knew nothing. Like I said, I just didn't know what was going on in my life. You know, and I got to a point where, somebody had phoned up this organisation, Narcotics Anonymous, and for help for themselves. And they said, "Well, look, is the addict there? Is the person there you're talking about?" And this woman gave me the phone, and she said, "They want to speak to you, Harry." And I said, "Who want to speak to me?" And she said, "Narcotics Anonymous." You know, and I'd never heard of Narcotics Anonymous, but the name sounded interesting. You know, it had the word narcotics in, it had the word anonymous in, you know what I mean? I was trying to find a methadone program at the time, so I thought, yeah, I don't mind speaking to this guy at the end of the phone, and often say to this day, I feel really, really pleased that when I said to this guy, his name was Gordon actually, I said, "Gordon," I said, "can you tell me how to get onto a methadone program?" And he said, "Look, you know," he said, "come to an NA meeting." He didn't say to me, "No, this is about total abstinence." He didn't tell me that I was going to walk in and see the word God on the wall, that I was going to see the word spiritual, you know, prayer, meditation, moral, all these words that would later come to scare me. He didn't say any of that stuff. He implied that if I came to my first NA meeting that I might just find methadone there, you know. So because I thought that, you know, I turned up at my first NA meeting half an hour early, you know. And I'm waiting outside for the meeting to start, and I remember this guy coming up to me and sort of like shaking my hand, and so, and he said, "Are you waiting for the meeting to start?" And I looked at him and I said, "Well, I might be." I said, "Why?" And he sort of stuck his hand and he said, "My name's Derek and I'm an addict." And I looked at this guy and he didn't look like any addict I'd ever seen before, you know. He had a suntan for a start, you know. An addict with a suntan, you know, was just, I'd never seen one before, you know. And he was wearing shorts, he was wearing a watch as well. You know, watch, an addict with a watch, that was the first thing to go when I was kind of like using, you know, straight down the pawn shop, you know. Not only that, he had a smile on his face, you know, and he was telling me he was an addict, and I'm going, yeah, pull the other one. And I'm thinking, but, you know, there's going to be drugs here. There's going to be drugs here. And, you know, half a dozen people came to that first meeting. They all came up and introduced themselves to me. None of them looked like addicts. They all told me they were an addict. None of them looked like addicts. They all far too clean, far too happy, far too well dressed, you know, and so I'm going into this place, and I had this kind of fantasy that there would be a kind of polished oak bar, and they would pump up 120 ml of methadone and say, "There we are, Harry, on the way," you know, and they gave me a cup of rather weak coffee, you know. And I'm thinking, well, maybe at the end of the meeting, because by this time, of course, I had seen the word God. I'd walked in, I'd seen the word God on the wall. I'd seen the word, you know, these things, these steps, you know, and, you know, the word moral and spiritual, and all these things that scared me a bit, you know, when I first walked in. And yet, within an hour and a half, my life had changed. I went from being hopeless, without hope, to having hope within an hour and a half. Because everybody did a kind of mini version of what I'm doing at the moment. Everybody did about what it was like, how they came into NA, and they talked about this strange thing that they were talking about called recovery, you know, which I didn't really relate to, but I certainly understood what they were talking about when they were talking about their using. I got so much identification with that, you know. And it wasn't the fact that everybody used the same amount of drugs or everybody used for the same amount of time. Some people hadn't used as long as I had. Some people had used a lot longer. Some people had used this drug. Some people had used that drug. You know, had I wanted to look for the differences, there were plenty of differences there. But I think such was the fact, sort of the way I was at the time. It was the similarities. It was the desperation. It was the hopelessness that I was relating to. I knew at the end of the hour and a half that these people who were sitting in the room were addicts, without a doubt, which I didn't believe beforehand. You know, I knew they were addicts. You know, I got incredible identification when I came. They'd been where I was at that particular point, you know, and that was amazing to get that hope. And that was on January the 1st, 1985. And I then went into what was probably the worst part of my using, because I started coming to meetings on a regular basis, but I wasn't staying clean. I still thought I knew better, you see. It hadn't occurred to me that my best efforts were the reason I'm sitting here today, and that my best thinking got me to these rooms, you know. I still thought I was going to be the guy who was going to have the occasional drink. I still thought that I was going to be the guy who was going to have the occasional spliff, you know, and you know what it's like when you're coming down, you can't sleep, so I needed handfuls of sleeping pills, and if your depression was as bad as my depression, then you would also need to take handfuls of antidepressants. So I never actually got clean, but I was coming to these meetings, and every time I came to meetings, I was confronted with a solution. Here is a solution if you want what we have to offer. You know, yes, I want what we have to offer, you know, and I'm willing to make the effort to get it. I wasn't willing to make the effort to get it. I wanted to do it on my terms, you know. So for that next month, I'd met hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of recovering addicts at that time. It was a big fellowship in Australia, you know, and every time I went there was the solution, and I couldn't do it. I felt terrible, you know. I came for a month, and I found myself yet again, 28 years and one day ago, I found myself yet again, you know, lying in a toilet in a tube station, with a needle in my arm, lying in my own piss and in my own vomit because I'd gone under, you know, and with my head on the porcelain bowl. And I came round thinking, there's got to be more to life than this. You know, there's got to be more to life than this. And at that particular point, I think what happened was I was so desperate that I remember fishing these telephone numbers out from my pocket that was given to me in that very first meeting I went to, and making my way through the telephone numbers till I found somebody who was in. And he said, why don't you check in? He said, why don't you give this detox a call? And I gave this detox a call. It was a short-term 7-day detox. It was cold turkey. But I was willing to do anything. You know, at that point, I was willing to listen to what was being said. And I wasn't listening to probation officers. I wasn't listening to counsellors. I wasn't listening to drug workers. I wasn't listening to social workers. I wasn't listening to old Bill. I wasn't listening to vicars. I was listening to other addicts who had been where I had been and said, this is the way out. This is the way we did it, you know. And because I understood that, this guy said, why don't you do this? And I just did it. You know, I was so fed up of fighting, you know. And we had an expression there which was to take the cotton wool out of our ears and stick it in our mouth, you know. I think that's what I did. I surrendered. I waved the white flag of surrender and I gave it, you know. And I got clean. I think about those first few days getting clean, and like anybody, it was tough work, you know. It's not easy getting clean. Sometimes I think we've got to skate over that, you know. I do, in any case. I sort of like make it sound like it was this really easy thing, and that they get it, and the recovery, but it was so fucking difficult just to get clean, you know. It was such a problem, you know. Just I'd never been clean before. Well, I'd been clean when I was in police cells. That was it, you know. When I physically couldn't get hold of any drugs, that was the only time I'd ever been clean before in my life. Well, since I started using, and here I was kind of clean, and couldn't sleep. I was on an emotional roller coaster, and I was up and down, and you know, and I was in this place. And whilst we were in this place, this detox centre, they very much believed in the 12 steps of NA and AA. And whilst we were in there, we were taken to 2, 3, sometimes 3 meetings a day. You know, here is your rehab, here is your treatment. You know, if you want to stay clean, you can get clean by hanging around meetings. You know, and I was lucky enough to be in a big NA community where I could do that. You know. And so we were taken to these meetings whilst I was there. By this time I'd come to really enjoy going to meetings because you were my type of people. I was getting identification with you, you know what I mean? I was really kind of like, I was getting hope, you know, because I knew you weren't bullshitting me about the using, you know, and I was beginning to have a bit of faith that what you were saying about the recovery thing was also true as well. So I'd sort of come into this recovery phase of what was going on with myself then. And it was just, you know, it was, when I think about it, it was just madness. I loved it, but it was madness, that those first few days, those first few weeks, the first year or so. It was just this, it was like I stepped onto an emotional roller coaster, and off I went, you know, whoomp. And I would be up and I would be down several times in the same day, you know. That would be one thing that would really puzzle me. If I was feeling really down, I'd be thinking, now what did I do wrong there? I must have done something wrong, you know. And whilst I was puzzling out what I'd done wrong to make myself feel so down, suddenly my mood would rise again, you know. But I couldn't identify a feeling. I just felt kind of good, or I felt like shit, suicidal, you know. And then I'd feel good, and it was just on this amazing roller coaster that I was on. And it was great, you know, because other people who were around were telling me the same thing. You know, I was able to go to lots of meetings. I was able to hang out in a social situation with other recovering addicts. I didn't feel like I could socialise with people. I didn't feel I had anything to say. I'd forgotten how to live like a human being during my using. You know, I'd forgotten how to look after myself. I'd forgotten how to communicate with people. I needed to learn how to do that again. And there was after the meetings in Australia, we used to go out and drink coffee. You know, until kind of like 5, 6 o'clock in the morning, and then everybody wondered why we couldn't sleep. You know, on your 50th cappuccino with your hair standing on end, you know, rabbiting on and on, you know, and I wonder why I couldn't sleep. But I'd hang out with these people, all these people in early recovery, and they would talk about this emotional roller coaster, you know, and you know, and that's what happened, you know, and right from the beginning, I wanted more of what was on offer. I really did. I liked recovery, even from that time of being in the detox centre, however painful it was, you know. I was about 5 days clean, and Linton asked me to tell you this story. I was 5 days clean, and I was in this detox centre, and I was feeling like shit, really. But, you know, I'd asked to be let outside. It was about 5 in the morning. They asked to be let outside so I could watch the sun come up. And I went outside and I watched the sun come up, which didn't sound like much, but watching the sun come up, and I was sitting underneath a eucalyptus tree, okay? And I watched this beautiful thing come up, because whenever the sun used to come up for me, you know, it just meant, what the fuck am I going to have to do today? What am I going to have to do today to get hold of the money, to get hold of the drugs, so I can repeat the whole thing again tomorrow ad infinitum? This time I watched the sun come up, and it was beautiful, you know, and I could smell the eucalyptus tree that I was sitting underneath. Doesn't sound like a lot, but I had not done any of that stuff. You know, I thought that drugs enhanced these things, but actually the drugs had deadened all this stuff. And finding the stuff clean, you know, being able to smell that stuff and see the colours and see the sun come up was just beautiful. You know, that for me was my spirit beginning to reawaken, because I'd heard that this was a spiritual program. Spiritual, not religious program. And the funny thing was, I've never really had a problem with the word spiritual. Because for me it means of the spirit, you know, and what I know about my spirit before I came here, I knew that something inside me had died at the end of my using. You know, when I read the word spiritual bankruptcy, it made sense to me. My spirit was dead. You know, my life force was dead. I didn't care whether I lived or died. It was a slow suicide in any case. I just didn't care. And that beginning of being able to smell that thing and watch the colours and the sun come up, that was that little flicker inside me, just of my spirit, just letting me know that it was still there, you know what I mean? And it was beginning to come back to life again, you know. And, yeah, and I've never looked back, really. I've really enjoyed my recovery, you know. I can't pretend. I did think, there was this thing that did think I'd put down the drugs and everything would just come together. My life would just become this kind of rose garden, you know, the money would come in, the jobs would come in, the relationships would just kind of all slot into place. And it hasn't been like that. You know, it hasn't been like that. I've got life back on life certain terms. But, you know, I come here through choice. When I was using, I had no choice. You know, the thing about addiction for me is that addiction equals the complete opposite to freedom. You know, I've been lucky enough to go into prisons and to do talks in prisons, and sometimes when I go to these prisons where they have treatment centres within inside the prison, and the guys in there are clean, the guys in there who are clean tell me that they have more freedom inside a prison clean than they do using on the out. And I kind of understand that, you know, because I was in my own self-made prison. You know, I had to use, I couldn't move from where I was. My whole life revolved around the getting and using of drugs, you know. And when I got clean, this great freedom happened to me. You know, suddenly I was free to do what I wanted and where I wanted to go. And, you know, at the beginning, it was, you know, for that first year or so, it was just about being clean. I had enough on my plate just being clean, you know, just learning how to be clean. I couldn't really concentrate too much when I first came around, but when people were talking, I would listen to, say, sort of like 30-40% of what they would say, and my mind would wander. I couldn't read too much. I could read, of course I could read, but I couldn't, you know, the words kind of swim in front of me, you know, I didn't understand what I was reading, you know. So I didn't sit there and get stuck straight into the steps or anything like that. You know, I didn't suddenly start working these things. People talked about sponsorship, for example. Like, the addict that I was, I didn't want to admit that I didn't know anything. So when I heard people talk about sponsorship, I didn't really know what they were talking about. I thought we needed to go out and get kind of sponsored by a large company, preferably a drug company or something. It would sponsor me to get clean because I've fucking spent so much money with them. Maybe they just but so I didn't know because I wouldn't go and ask it. I wouldn't say, "Hey Tom, what does sponsorship mean?" And you would tell me because it would mean that I'd been telling you that I didn't know what. So I'd just sit there in silence, thinking, "Wonder what that means," So I didn't know much about recovery. All I was doing was coming to meetings and often hear people as soon as they come and they say, "Right, work the steps, work the steps, work the steps." I let the steps work me for a while. I didn't sit there it wasn't a deliberate act. I didn't sit there and say, right, I'm going to let the steps work me. But what I knew, if you'd asked me about my addiction, why was I sitting in a meeting? It's the same today as it was then. The reason I was sitting in a meeting was because I could not control my use of drugs. I could tell you that my life was a complete and utter chaotic mess. Everywhere I looked was a mess. Everything about me, internally, externally, was a mess, and I could not control it. If that's not step one, I don't know what is, And the action part of that step was I was now clean. I was now totally abstinent, If somebody said to me, "Why are you going to meetings, Harry?" I would tell you the reason I go to the meetings then is the same reasons I go to the meetings now, because something happens in these rooms and a miracle happens in my life and I stay clean. I'm restored to a sense of sanity. That means I no longer use mind and mood altering chemicals, Here is a power greater than myself that is restoring me to sanity. So I didn't need to look at step 2 for me to start working these steps. They already started working, I often think it must be interesting to have gone back to see what, Bill and, Bill W. and Dr. Bob, how they worked these things out, because they must have looked at how their recovery had gone rather like that and said, right, this is what happened at the beginning, let's write these things out, you know what I mean? And that's what happened to me. Just kind of, they started working my life, and after about 3 months I started looking at them and seeing about what was going on. And, that was when I started working the steps, I guess. When I started having a look at step 3 and sort of building that foundation. And for me, that was a very important thing. Because, like I said, just by staying clean, I had plenty of opportunity to start working these first 3 steps, And, and I remember, I still say one of the best bits of advice I was ever given was when I was in an AA meeting, funnily enough, in Sydney, and I was clean for about 11 months. And I remember there was 2 guys I was with, and they were sharing from the floor about working their step 6 and 7 and their step 11, and I'm thinking I'm still sort of like struggling with my step 3. I'm still struggling with this word God, let alone anything else, struggling with that, I remember sharing that and saying I'm really struggling with this, and wondering how long it was going to take me to get to step 9, 10, 11 and all that type of stuff. And this old boy came up to me and he said, look, work them in the order they're written. Start with step 1 and work your way through to step 12. And I said to him, but how long is that going to take me? And he said, son, if you're lucky, you'll have the rest of your life to work these steps. And that's been the way I've worked them, That's easy does it, but do it. It has been about building a foundation for my recovery. I don't know how people can get onto 6, 7, 8 and 9 without a real decent understanding, for example, of a God of their understanding, without working these steps, I really needed to put that very firmly into place, I love NA, the fact that it is not an academic exercise. This is about getting well, it's not about getting good. And I can sit with my head in a book, I can sit there with my pen to paper and the rest of it, I can write reams and reams and reams. I'm not saying that's not good, it might well be good, but it makes no difference to me. My recovery, I got clean when people didn't do that sort of stuff. I got clean when we had a paperback book, which didn't have the stories in the back, the steps and the rest of it. And when we wanted to see what a step was, we opened the book and we read a page of what was written. Sometimes I think we lose track of that, it's only my thing, we lose track of it in kind of like with all the reams and reams of stuff that's written about stuff. We lose track, we forget to actually look at what the step says. So we can read all about step 3, we can write about step 3. Sometimes we need to go back and just look at what step 3 says, for example, because the clue is in what step 3 says. It seems a crazy thing. Nice and simple, keep it simple. This is a program, this is a simple program. It really is. The more further on with this stuff I go, the more simple I realise it is. It's not difficult. It doesn't matter if you're clever or not. It doesn't matter, whether you can do, it is open for everybody. I love it, you know, and it just seems to flow. When it's ready for my next step, I know when it's ready for my next step, the penny drops. I understand the step I'm on, and then suddenly I have opportunities to start working the next step, you know. The steps have been incredibly important to me in my recovery, you know, they've been incredibly important to me in my recovery. They give me a quality to my life today, because it's not about using drugs. It's been 28 years since I've used drugs. Why do I sit here and say my name's Harry, I'm an addict? You know, because my addiction can come out in all kinds of ways, you know, whether it be the internet, whether it be lust, whether it be anger, you know, whatever one of those things for me, you know, and I know with other people have different things, but it all comes out in different ways, you know. And again, I'm just like everybody else. I'm an addict, and what happens is if I do something and I enjoy it, I knock the fucking hell out of it. You know what I mean? Even if I know it's not doing me any good. If somebody comes into this room with something new, if one of you guys are sitting there, maybe I've never heard of the internet before, so I'm terrible, this internet thing has really got me down, I can't get off it, you know what I mean? I'm on Facebook all the time, I can't stop it, you know, I can't talk to my friends anymore, you know what I mean? Because I'm on this thing all the time, you know what I mean? And it's making my life a complete and utter misery. I'm sitting here going, that sounds interesting. I'll give that a go, you know what I mean? Because that's what being an addict is about, you know, so that's where my addiction comes out today, and I need to, even within recovery, I need to knock something pretty hard before I'm willing to do something about it. I'm not one of these clever people who say, oh, I can see where this is leading, you know what I mean, therefore I must stop. You know? So I've had an interesting life. Thank heavens recovery is about getting well, not about getting good, you know. So I love it, and yeah, I'll bring it to an end, but I will say that, you know, I've had times in my recovery where I honestly have thought, can life get any better than this? You know, I've had the most brilliant things happen to me in life, you know. You know, 7 months clean, I got into a relationship. Yeah, there we go. Got into a relationship. Don't get into relationships, they say. You know, I did get into a relationship. As it happens, I also got into a relationship. I was in a relationship with my sponsor, I was in a relationship with my family, I was in relationships with my friends, you know. I was having relationships, you know, this idea we don't have relationships. I think what people mean when they say don't have relationships in early recovery, they're talking about sexual politics. I think they're saying don't have sexual relations in early recovery. Don't have sexual relations? What does that mean? Harry's ears are pricking up. What, is that fun then? Yeah, it's fun, but you don't want to do it. What, you've done it, have you? Yeah, and you've got through it all right. And I'm not meant to. Am I? Fuck off, give me a bit of that, you know. So, sound advice maybe, but I'm going to go there and do it, you know. And I did do it. And like with anything in recovery, you know, the thing is, put your recovery first, and put NA at the centre of your recovery. Because we're not going to be able to go through recovery without making mistakes. Well, this addict's not, in any case. I made plenty of mistakes. You know, the point is, if I make mistakes, you know, I've got my recovery at the centre of my life, and it doesn't matter. So I got into a relationship with a woman, and we got married, you know, and I had 2 wonderful kids. You know, I was there when my kids were born. I don't just mean physically there either. I was emotionally there when my kids were born. I was able to be there for my kids as they grew up, you know. Talking with Andy earlier on before the meeting, was talking about travelling. It's one of the things I've had the pleasure of doing is travelling. I love travelling around the world, you know. I don't have to travel around the world, but I went to an NA convention a little while ago when I had money. They were the days when I had money, you know. I was looking to where NA convention, let's go travelling, where we go, let's go to the net. I said to a mate of mine, let's go to a convention. We looked through the clean times at the back, I had a list of conventions. And there was one in the Bahamas. Well, we'll go there then, Bahamas. That sounds great, you know, convention in the Bahamas, the freedom to be able to do that, you know. About 14 years clean, but I was able to go out there and kind of swim with tropical fish and snorkel and have barbecues on desert islands. It was just beautiful, you know, absolutely beautiful, you know. I always wanted to earn money. I always wanted to run my own business, and I was able to do that in recovery, you know. I got to a point where I earned more money than I'd ever thought I could earn. You know, new cars, big houses, holidays whenever I wanted, you know. Life has been full of that sort of stuff. But I would be lying if I was to say to you that's what it's all about. You know what I mean? Because whilst those things have happened to me, there's the other side of the coin as well. We're talking about real life here. You know, the relationship I was in finished after 16 months. You know, I often say one of the hardest things I ever had to do in recovery was to wave goodbye to my kids as they moved back to Australia, you know. I cried my eyes out, you know what I mean? I was able to go to a meeting that day in Brixton, and I was able to pull my eyes out because of it, you know. It was really, really difficult. Then my daughter came back, decided she didn't want to live with her mum and come back to live with me. My 14-year-old daughter decided she was going to come back and live with me. That was fucking hard, you know. What's that, Lynn?
6 months, 16 years.
Oh, well, there we go.
Thanks, Lyndon.
Yeah, good man, yeah. But, you know, so these things have happened. You know, the business that I thought I wanted, you know, I couldn't sleep right. I couldn't sleep at night properly. I had a year and a half of low-grade anxiety, low-grade depression. You know what I mean? That I wasn't sitting there saying I need antidepressants. I knew there was a reason because I was depressed. You know what I mean? But I didn't want to admit to the reason I was depressed. I didn't want to carry on with that life anymore. That was a really big decision to say I was not going to do that anymore, you know. 4 years ago I ended up in hospital, you know, quite bad, you know, with blood clots on my lungs, pneumonia, liver failure, and I came round on the Saturday with a priest sitting at the end of my bed, you know, and I had to take morphine, you know, because I was in so much pain with that, you know. Well, it's a thing I really, really didn't want to do, you know, but, yeah, that's life, isn't it, you know. I don't like the bad stuff. I much prefer the good stuff. I don't like the bad stuff. I didn't like it when my dad died. But what I did like about it was the fact that I could front up as his elder son. I could organise the funeral for my mum. You know what I mean? I could support the family. You know what I mean? I could feel that stuff. You know what I mean? I was able to take responsibility for that. And for that sort of stuff, I'll always be grateful. You know what I mean? Freedom. That's what I love about recovery. Recovery equals freedom. You know, the fact of the matter is, a lot of people are going to leave this room and they're going to use again. But the message is, you don't, every single one of us here, no one ever has to use again if you don't want to. If you really don't want to, you don't ever have to use again. That's just the first part of it, not wanting to use again, because just saying I don't want to use again is not good enough in itself. I need to back it up with action. But what easy action to back it up with? You know, going to meetings, talking to your sponsor, working these steps, doing a bit of service. That's it. That's the solution. That's how this thing works. If you want that stuff, you can have it. And thanks for listening and asking me to share.
Lovely.
Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. Please help us improve our ranking so others can find us by putting a review on Stitcher, iTunes, or your favorite podcast index. Nawpod is ad-free thanks to the folks supporting the show with $1 or more per month. If you enjoy listening, you can join them by going to nawpod.xyz and looking for the donate link. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.